Hey everyone, and welcome to this explainer. Today we're going to break down an absolutely dramatic ancient military shift. We're looking at a primary source narrative that details the war against the remaining Canaanites right after a monumental shift in leadership. It's a fascinating story of early momentum, brutal ancient warfare, the leverage of vital resources, and ultimately how a massive technological disadvantage forced a complete change in strategy. Okay, let's take a really quick look at our roadmap for today. We'll start with A power vacuum-filled, move into brutal justice in Bezek, explore bribes, marriages, and spies, tackle the iron chariot problem, and finally wrap things up with settlements and stalemates. Let's get right into it. Section 1. A power vacuum filled. So, picture the scene. The death of Joshua has just created this massive, destabilizing void. Joshua was this singular, charismatic leader holding an entire military campaign together, right? So the Israelites actually asked the Lord, who should lead the fight now? The tribe of Judah is chosen, with a promise that the land is delivered into his hand. But what Judah does next is honestly a masterclass in early military strategy. Judah steps up and immediately forms a strategic alliance with Simeon. Judah basically says, hey, come up with me into my lot, and I'll do the exact same for you and yours. This proves that even with a divine mandate, shared resources and unified fronts are absolutely crucial. They're smartly consolidating their forces before striking out. Moving on to Section 2, brutal justice in Bezek, Hunkram. With their forces combined, Judah and Simeon march right into their first major encounter. And guys, the scale of this initial strike is staggering. They slay 10,000 men right out of the gate at Bezek. This huge number clearly sends a message to all the surrounding regions that the military machine Joshua built definitely did not die with him. Now, this next part is wild and honestly a bit chilling. During the battle, the opposing leader, King Adoni-Bezek, tries to flee, but Judah's forces pursue and capture him, and they enact a very specific, gruesome punishment. They cut off his thumbs and his great toes. But rather than curse them, Adoni-Bezek actually reflects on his own history. He states that 70 kings, 70, suffered this exact same mutilation at his own hands, reduced to gathering scraps under his table. He basically recognizes he is facing the exact karma of his own past atrocities, saying, "As I have done, so God hath requited me." This brilliantly and brutally illustrates the eye for an eye reality of ancient warfare. Think about it. Without thumbs, a warrior cannot grip a sword. Without big toes, you literally cannot maintain the balance required to run or fight. It was a highly calculated way to permanently neutralize a threat. Adoni-Bezek is brought to Jerusalem, where he dies, and this coincides with the children of Judah taking Jerusalem, smiting it with the sword, and setting the city on fire. It is absolute fiery conquest in these early stages. Which brings us to Section 3, bribes, marriages, and spies. As the campaign moves south into the mountains, brute force isn't the only tool they're using. We start seeing these micro-narratives of incentive-based warfare. For instance, as they move against the city of Debir, a leader named Caleb issues a challenge. Whoever smites the city gets his daughter Aksa as a wife. A man named Othniel rises to the challenge, takes the city, and wins the marriage. But honestly, the real strategic genius here is Aksa herself. She realizes they've been given what's called a Southland, which was a notoriously dry region. So she brilliantly negotiates with her father, asking for springs of water. Caleb gives her both the upper and nether springs. She secures these crucial water resources, which, as we know, were absolute lifelines for sustaining any newly conquered territory. Parallel to this, the house of Joseph is employing entirely different tactics at a city called Bethel. They don't just march right up to the walls, they send spies to scope it out. When they spot a local man leaving, they make a highly pragmatic trade. Show us the entrance to the city and we'll show you mercy. The informant complies. The city is breached and taken, but the man and his family are allowed to walk away. He even goes on to build a completely new city in the land of the Hittites. The House of Joseph is using tactical espionage and local assets rather than pure brute force, which shows a real strategic evolution. But then we hit Section 4, the iron chariot problem. Just as total victory across the board seemed totally inevitable, the entire campaign hits a massive, literal roadblock. Up until now, the momentum has been exclusively on the side of the incoming tribes. Let's look at this stark text comparison on the screen. The source clearly states that the Lord was with Judah, and he successfully drove out the inhabitants of the mountain regions. Total success. But then, a sharp contrast. They could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley. Why? Because the enemy possessed chariots of iron. The momentum is completely halted, not by a lack of will, but by a specific superior technology held by the Canaanites. You kind of have to think of iron chariots as the heavy tanks of the ancient world. In the rugged, uneven mountains, chariots are totally useless. Infantry reigns supreme. But down in the flat, open expanses of the valleys, a fleet of iron chariots provides a devastating, high-speed, heavily armored advantage. The Israelite infantry simply couldn't stand against them. This terrain and technology combo created an insurmountable disadvantage that put a hard border on their expansion. And that leads us to our final section, settlements and stalemates. This technological barrier forced a total shift in the nature of the occupation. We are officially leaving the era of complete conquest and entering the era of compromise. Look at this breakdown on the slide. As we read through the accounts of Manasseh, Ephraim, Zebulun, and Asher, the text repeats this striking phrase over and over: neither did they drive them out. The Canaanites simply dwelt in that land. The initial goal of total displacement is just abandoned. When Israel was strong, they didn't drive them out. Instead, they put them to tribute. It became an economic arrangement rather than a military removal. The momentum just comes to a grinding halt. Naphtali dwells among the inhabitants, but extracts tribute. But look at the tribe of Dan. They face an even worse outcome. The Amorites actually force the children of Dan back up into the mountains, actively denying them access to the valley. The tables completely turned. Now, the house of Joseph eventually flexes enough muscle to make those Amorites tributaries, but the overarching narrative has completely shifted from a sweeping, fiery conquest to a complicated patchwork of uneasy settlements and economic taxation. As we wrap up this explainer, we really have to look at the big picture here. What started with the burning of Jerusalem and 10,000 slain at Bezek ended in tax collection and shared cities. So we have to ask ourselves, was the shift to collecting tribute a sign of military defeat against superior technology, or was it just a highly pragmatic geopolitical pivot to build a functioning economy in a shared land? When you hit a wall of iron chariots, perhaps extracting tribute is simply the natural next evolution of warfare. Thanks so much for joining me on this explainer, and keep exploring the incredible strategies buried in our ancient past.